I'm Jim Phillips, and very often I'm asked to speak on a variety of subjects, and one of them is sanitation. As a matter of fact, for this very short program, I was asked, can you tell us about sanitation in like a half hour or 20 minutes or something like that? Well, I can to a certain extent, but it's a huge topic, and there's a lot to it. But I'm going to give you some highlights. As a matter of fact, we'll be talking about sanitation, and this is a thumbnail sketch. And it's of the basic sanitation class series, which is 4101, 4102, and 4103. All the basic classes put together take about 5 hours to go through, so it won't quite fit in the 20 minutes, but fasten your seat belts because we're going to hurry along. What we're really talking about is being able to be self-reliant, and it's about making provisions for the future. If you don't make provisions for the future, you'll end up a victim. So I simply tell you, well, there's two choices. Pick one, whichever one you would like to have. It is about understanding and being able to implement some practical principles of sanitation. I like to come at it from a principle standpoint, teach you how and why things work, and it's all aimed at self-reliance. Now, there's a little statement I like to make that's called the truth about life, and it is this. There's no doubt that tomorrow will come, and there's no dispute that things happen. But how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. When we think about sanitation, all the things attached to it, well, this is how it is. I mean, we have a place to throw the garbage, you can take it to the street, and you go flip the handle on that porcelain thrown in there, and all the stuff just disappears wonderfully. And we live in such a wonderful society where we have these advantages. Well, where does sanitation fit into the scheme of preparedness? Well, let's start with some of these foundation principles that I talk about. I'm going to be referring you back to, and just for a very few seconds, to foundation classes 1101 and 1102. You can look at those classes in depth and learn these things, because I'm just going to touch on them very quickly. The first law that I'll talk about is the Law of Provident Living, and it has 4 parts to it. There's an order of priority, and they are: number 1, spiritual; number 2 is attitude, and that'll make the difference between whether you live and die when things are really tough; number 3 is knowledge; and number 4 is stuff, the material things. It has to be in that order. I don't have time to develop that here, but please accept that for the moment, that it must go from spiritual, the foundation for everything, and finally down to the material things that we use every day. The Law of Stewardship is another one of these laws that's critically important. As a matter of fact, I figure that if you're here watching this, listening to this, that you probably have felt something about stewardship, so let me define that for you. First, in stewardship, we have authority. The fact that you are alive, and here you have the authority to act in your life. So that's just the way that it is. You accepted that assignment. Number 2 is responsibility, and that's where we live our lives day by day. It's all about responsibility, taking on the assignments that are handed to us or that we come across, and it's really about how well we carry them off. And then third on the list is accountability, and accountability is about the just consequences that will happen as a result of what you do, and they will always be just in the long run. And remember this concept about a stick. If you remember, if you pick up one end of a stick, you pick up the other end also. That's what accountability is all about. When you take on the responsibility for something, there will be an accountability for it, an accounting, if you will. And this will be, it'll either be enjoyable and pleasurable and fun and very positively rewarding, or it might in fact be rather painful and instructive, but yet it will still be just in the long run. So you're here because of your responsibility, I believe. There are 9 key preparedness areas that I talk about, and these are critical. In fact, we can describe some of them if we wanted to. It's kind of like a parachute. If you take a look at this list of these 9, the foundation, which is about the principles and understanding of how and why things work, clothing, water, sanitation, nutrition, shelter, wellness, tools, and supplies, and there's a lot of things inside of those. If you say, well, I'm just going to cross one of those off the list, in the long run, you'll die. You have to have all of them. So they're all very much like a parachute. If you don't have a parachute, you're in big trouble when you fall out of a plane. Obviously, tonight we're talking about sanitation, number 4 on this list. Okay, sanitation. I describe it as the hidden disaster. And by the way, very few people recognize just how serious it is. Why is sanitation so important? Well, in fact, most people just really don't have a clue. And I don't mean that unkindly, but they're just clueless in our society because we haven't had to deal with these problems. They don't know how serious it truly is, and it's incredibly serious. Let's put sanitation in perspective. The health and life expectancy of all of us in the Western world, and particularly in the U.S., significantly improved during the 20th century. It's been marvelous. And very often the credit is given to antibiotics and drugs and all these wonderful things. But the truth is that nearly all, 80%, 90% of those improvements have come about because of sanitation. If you don't believe that, read the story of Florence Nightingale and some of these early pioneers that were looking at people who were dying of disease and sickness. It was all about sanitation, and we've learned that. That's where all the improvements have come. Now, sanitation is vitally important. As a matter of fact, where sanitation is poor, disease and death runs rampant. It's extremely important that we understand that. Gratefully, in the U.S., we are very inexperienced with sanitation breakdown, our systems that we have, our infrastructure. We're blessed by that. However, this means it will catch a lot of people off guard when things really come apart. Should they come apart? Now, I hope that they don't. Sanitation following a disaster, this concept, and it's not just during the disaster, but it's following the disaster. If you get this wrong, you die. During emergencies and disasters, things break down. You have loss of infrastructure. We're talking about things that support us like water and sewer, electricity, also transportation, medical services, waste collection, insect and vermin control. During disasters, people can break down. We're talking about the physical stress that's very, very high, the emotional stress, lack of proper rest. You also have poor and inadequate nutrition, biological and microbial overload. And what happens is the immune system, the body's protection system, simply becomes grossly overloaded and it collapses. It just shuts down. The spread of illness and disease, it's all about interrelated vectors. Vectors are things that kind of move this around and make it happen. Here we're talking about the air and the soil and food and water and people and insects and vermin, animals, clothing, surfaces, all these kinds of things that help spread disease. Now the goal is this. The goal is to stop the rampant spread of cholera, typhoid, E. coli, strep, polio, those kinds of things, dysentery, giardia, herpes, strep, flu. And the big ones after disasters are cholera, typhoid, dysentery. These are monstrous killers. And as a matter of fact, this is what's been going on in Haiti as we've taken a look at that terrible earthquake that happened and took many, many lives. But the suffering that occurs afterwards from the breakdown of sanitation can be just as severe, if not more so. And the problem is, you can't just fix it overnight. You have to prevent it. And since it's got started in that society, we're not just talking a few months or a few years. We're talking decades, even generations, to get it fully under control and beat back to where it's no longer an issue. The people of Haiti, I want you to hear this very carefully. The people of Haiti were better prepared to deal with what came to them than our people are here. That may surprise you, but let's understand this. Should the U.S. have a Haiti level of event, disease and death will be worse for us than it has been and will be for them. Why would I say that? Consider this simple thought. The people in Haiti were already dealing with poor conditions. They were kind of used to it. They were kind of psychologically, mentally, physically adjusted to doing those things. So when this terrible thing happened, they only had a little ways to fall. Think about us and all the advantages and the wonders that we have, and that people just don't consider the possibility. And we're up here, and when that happens and we go down to this level, it will absolutely decimate many, many people, unfortunately. Well, it's about being prepared to deal with those things. You see, today, a minor injury or sickness is just not an issue. It's not a problem for very simple reasons. Well, we're under normal physical stress, normal emotional stress. We have a functioning sanitation system, and we have a functioning healthcare system. But during a disaster, when stress is high, when the system is down, and when the environment is contaminated, minor injuries or sickness can become deadly in a hurry, very, very quickly. You see, prevention is vital. This is what it's all about. It's about prevention. When things really break down, when it's really, really serious, it will be up to you. And the cavalry may not be coming. You know those guys we see in the movies that are in the blue coats on the horses with the bugles and the flags flying and what have you that come over the hill to save you? Those guys may not be there. And we appreciate so much the work of the Red Cross and of the National Guard and of FEMA and other organizations that step up to try and help people. But they can be totally overwhelmed, and they themselves could be in serious trouble. and unable to help. That's why you have to consider that it's up to you. Actions now, the things you do now in preparation will determine the outcome, and your preparation truly is vital for the future should these happen. Infrastructure failure is a major concern. We talk about the things like the water, the power, transportation, sewage disposal, all these things that are so critical. You see, if everyone has to shelter in place, and what might cause that? Well, pandemic or some kind of a nuclear event or civil unrest and breakdown. And what happens is you have infrastructure failure that's caused by the loss of operating personnel and loss of maintenance. These systems don't run very long on their own automatically. They need people to help take care of them. Well, we'll start with the worst sanitation issue first, the worst first that we can start to deal with. One of the most deadly substances on earth is one that you and I have control over. It's human waste. Now, most of the sanitation stuff, you know, when we go to talk about it, it's kind of like socially, it's undiscussable. We're not going to talk about this stuff. I mean, how many times do you sit around the dinner table with the family and talk about poop? I mean, and that's what we're talking about here. Excuse my French, but let me just be blunt with you. We don't sit around and discuss these things, all kinds of, you don't talk about your dirty laundry and microbes on the countertops and things like that at the dinner table. You see, we have this wonderful system where things that we may be wanting to dispose of, they're simply whisked away. They're out of sight and out of mind. We take all of our systems for granted, and we don't have to worry about it. It just sort of happens, so we don't need to talk about it. Let me tell you this. We will talk about it here briefly in this one, and in the other classes we have to go into it in depth. And I have a very simple message. It's real straightforward. It's this: get over it and deal with it, because if you fail to do that, it can kill you. It's as simple as that. Well, human waste issues. We're going to go from the least hazardous to the most hazardous. We have urine. Urine is very little hazard at all. As a matter of fact, it's actually a resource. That's a class for another time. We have garbage, all the things that come out of the kitchen scraps and cooking and waste and those kinds of things. The big one is the fecal matter, the waste that comes out, the solid waste out of the bowels, the poop, as I said before. That stuff is incredibly hazardous. Now, modern disposal systems require several things. One of them is you have a functioning infrastructure. You have support personnel. You have electricity. You have fuels, energy, all those things. And these modern disposal systems can fail from physical damage, from loss of energy sources, loss of maintenance staff, and loss of operating personnel. And you see, when the system is disrupted, the responsibility is yours. Again and again, we come back to this idea of stewardship, the responsibility that you have to take care of them. And you have to think both downstream and upstream. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if we're thinking about sewage, you know, you're sending things downstream and people are sending it downstream to you perhaps, and that can be a real problem. You must take responsibility. You must also take that responsibility quickly. You can't sit around and wonder about things. Now, the power goes off for short periods of time. Things shut down, and when they're in the normal setting and you have a warning it's going to be off for 3 or 4 days or a couple hours or whatever it is, usually it's just a matter of hours, you make preparations for it because you get the warning. But if something significant happens, you have to take immediate action. You can't be delaying and wondering, what should I do? And you also have to think community. It's not just about you and your household. It's about everybody around you and in your neighborhood, both upstream and downstream. And it's important that you help others both now and in the future. If the system breaks down, what are you going to do? You see this thing? I'll bet everybody watching this has one of these things. A few people may not, but most people do. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about that problem? What are you prepared to do when these things simply go away and you no longer have access to them and our system isn't functioning? Well, people will normally think of a few things. You know, you may check up, well, I can go out and just dig a pit latrine, you know, an outhouse kind of a thing. Not a good solution. This is a good way to spread disease and contaminate all kinds of things, and the flies and the mosquitoes and the roaches and the squirrels and rats and whatever else that crawls down in there, crawls around, comes out, crawls on your food. That's part of the problem. People have RVs. You have this holding tank that's in the RV, and I mean, you got the water and a holding tank, and you can just flush and use it. Now, for short periods of time, and if you know the system is coming back, because what do you do with the stuff in that tank? You're just going to take a small volume and contaminate a bunch of water with it, so now you have this gigantic volume, and if you have 50 or 100 gallons of really ugly stuff and there's no place to put it, what are you going to do? This can be very, very hazardous and very problematic. We also have the chemical toilets and the porta potties and everything, you know, the stuff with the blue water. and it's like, okay, we're going to put it in there and we're going to pickle it. Pickle it to do what with it? If you don't have a system to dispose it in, you've got a very serious problem. And then, of course, we have the bushes. And that's not a good option either. So you have to have another way of taking care of these things. Now, first off, is there any doubt that sanitation is a parachute, like a parachute? You've got to have one when the system breaks. You have to have a plan, and you have to be prepared or you're in big trouble. Okay, the best prepared solutions, if somebody says, I want to be prepared, what's the best thing I can do? Well, let's talk about those for just a moment. For the city dweller, it's the composting toilet. This is for somebody that's attached to a sewage system, you know, the sewage disposal system. And there's a number of these that are available in manufacturers and more of them coming on. The composting toilet is a wonderful solution. It's worthy of study. It's worthy of learning. I don't have time to go into it here. The other one is if you're in a rural area off the municipal sewer system, you probably already have a buried septic system, and that's a great solution. Maintain it, take care of it, don't let it get all backed up on you. But it requires a reliable source of water to flush it. And if water is a serious problem, you may have to look back to the composting toilet. Now, if you don't have either one of those, haven't had time or resources, you have to have some other solutions. So we'll talk about a sewer down solution where you haven't solved it those other two ways. I can only give you key concepts because this area alone takes about an hour to fully develop, and we don't have but just a few moments left. Key concept number one is keep the urine separate from the fecal matter. Don't mix them together. You see, you can dispose of each by very different methods. Urine is safe and easy to work with. Urine is a very valuable resource. Like I said, another class for another time. But it is a resource that shouldn't be wasted in some cases. You have less weight and volume to handle and deal with when you don't have all that liquid that's added in with the solid matter. You have less contamination if there's an accident in the spill. And you don't have this soupy, sloppy mess that you're trying to deal with, and it reduces odor. So keep the urine separate. It's a concept that most people have never heard, but it's extremely important that you do that. This leaves you more easily to handle with the solid waste, with the fecal matter. And you have to have a safe long-term method, and I emphasize a long-term method of properly disposing of this fecal matter, of the poop again. If you have a holding tank, that's only a short-term solution unless you have some place to drive to and dump it off. We're talking about the fecal matter is very, very dangerous. You must be prepared in advance. You can't wait and try to figure this out when you're in trouble. If you get this wrong, people get sick, people die. Practice and know that you can do this and have the tools and the skill and all the things that you would need. And there's several options for doing this, one of them that I teach when we have more time. Keep the urine from being mixed in as much as possible for all the reasons already stated. And for some more information on this and a source you may not have expected, you can look in the scriptures in Deuteronomy 23:13. Can you imagine that? Way back in the beginning in the Bible, here we have a description of sanitation. Let me read it to you. And thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. You see, even the Lord knew what to do about these things. You have to have a way of handling them. Protect your home environment. One concept you need to be prepared to do is that raw sewage can enter into your home if you're connected to a municipal system. If there's people upstream flushing and there's reasons why the system may fail and back up, you need to understand that and have a way of taking care of that. Vitally important, because if your house becomes contaminated by sewage in the basement, you now have to move. And anything that's contaminated, you abandon. Keep things cleaned up. This is about all the wonderful plastic and paper things that we have, and then also having some of the other tools that you may need with the tubs and the buckets and the mops and the scrubbers and things like that. You have about cleaners and sanitizers. You've got to have cleaners and sanitizers. They're important to have around, but there's things that you may not even understand how you can use them that have multiple uses. Things like grapefruit seed extract and ammonia and vinegar and things like that that you may want to have. I'll teach you about those when there's more time. Hydrogen peroxide and vinegar, white vinegar, used separately but one after the other, is very, very effective at killing many, if not most, of the microbes. Also, some of the safety things that you need to learn that are vitally important. Never allow ammonia-based and chlorine-based products to get mixed together, stored together, somehow be used together or one after the other, because it can release very deadly chlorine gas. Pest and vermin control is one of those things you need to be prepared with, because if you're not, you can literally be overrun with all kinds of things like mice and rats in particular that will spread disease. and contaminate many of the supplies that you have, but it's flies and roaches and other things. So have strategies for that, know that you can do that. Personal hygiene is extremely important also, to have some of the things that you can safely use on the body to keep it clean and the things that touch your body. But you also need to know what doesn't work very well. And the bar soaps are not sanitizers, they're not good cleaners. As a matter of fact, they can spread disease. And a way to clean your clothes and anything that touches you, it's important that you have the tools, the means, and the practice to do that, and the supplies to make it happen. And then there's personal protection, a way of keeping you from becoming contaminated by things that could make you sick as you're having to deal with, handle, move, and what have you. Well, here's the question. Will you live providently? The law of provident living is about making provisions for the future. Will you do that? Well, the choice is yours. You can decide whether you're going to or not. But it's about by making the proper provisions in all areas of your life so that you can face the future without fear. Remember the statement in the very beginning, the truth about life is this: there's no doubt that tomorrow will come. And there's no dispute that things happen, but how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. And you see, I believe that our lives were created to be grand adventures of learning, growth, development, change, literally becoming more than we were in the beginning. Well, true preparedness is based on principles. It's not just about a list of things to buy and skills to practice and have. Those are important. But it's more about what you know. See, because what you know is far more important than what you have. Please don't feel overwhelmed. And this is an important topic I'd like to spend more time with. Each of us knows things, has things, and if you keep focusing on, you say, I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't have this, oh my goodness, I guess I'm going to die. Well, that'll help you a lot. Focus on what you do have, where you're going, and the commitment that you have to get it done. And that will make it, I'll say, more fun. As a matter of fact, this whole area should be enjoyable, not just one of misery and worry. Some people will say, if it's going to be so terribly bad that all the stuff quits and breaks down around us, why should I try to survive? I don't want to do that. I'd rather just die. Okay, fine. That may be easy for you, but remember your stewardship and your responsibility. How about children and grandchildren? How about others that you may have charge over, or others that you can bless? That is such an important thing to consider. And if you don't have a reason, usually it's about family, but if you don't have a reason, there's greater causes and reasons to decide that you want to make it. But don't wait until things are upon you. Do it now. Well, this concludes our very brief sanitation thumbnail. It's a sketch of these classes, 4101, 4102, and 4103. As you can see, there's a lot here if you dig into each one of those areas that are part of those classes. And I would encourage you to get information, good information, and always back it up to principles. Not just a list of things, not just because somebody says something. If somebody tells you to do something, they need to explain why they want you to do it or why you should have it. Don't take my word for it, understand why. Well, thank you very much for this time. I hope this helps you a great deal. Remember, sanitation is one of those things that if you don't pay attention to, it'll bite you. It can cause you to be sick, it can cause you to suffer, and it can cause you and other people around you to die. Please make provisions for it, and please have fun doing this and practice it and enjoy it. This is not about gloom and doom and misery. This is about making provisions for the future so we can approach and have the future and enjoy the future. Thank you very much.